Welcome to Dark Loops Productions, Chatting with Creatives. I'm Dr. Scott Jordan, aka Zombie Scotty. I'm a cognitive scientist philosopher at Illinois State University. And today we've come together to discuss this amazing movie, The Fix. And we have the great fortune of having the creator, the director, the writer with us, Kelsey Egan. Kelsey, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, as you know, we did a discussion of the movie, spoiler free, as it were. Today, we're going to go spoiler head on. And I've got two colleagues here who were with us during the pre-show. Dr. Elisabetta Di Minico, please tell everyone a little something about who you are and why you love pop culture.
Hi everyone, I'm Elisabetta Di Minico. I am una for career postdoc researcher at the Complutense University of Madrid. I'm also one of the organizer of Sogni Elettrici Electric Dream Film Festival, and our director is Stefano Locati, and I say hi Stefano. And I love pop culture, sci-fi, dystopia, basically because it can help us to see our world through a fictional lens that is able to amplify our reality and give us more insight on the real systems, power system, political system, interrelational systems in our daily life. And as I probably already mentioned before, I am specialized in dystopia, so I really loved the Fix because it merges a lot of teams that I usually work on. So thank you so much, Kelsey.
Thank you.
Fantastic. And how about you, Kelly?
Hi, everyone. I am Dr. Kellie Wallace, Associate Professor of Criminal Justice at LaSalle University in Boston, Massachusetts. I have been a lifelong lover of sci-fi, pop culture, all things creative. I really love seeing folks' creative outlets and what they can do and where their imaginations can take them. Much like Elisabetta just said, I don't see these as necessarily science fiction so much as potential future possibilities and premonitions of what's to come. But regardless of the storyline and the fantastic elements, again, kind of echoing what you just said, Elisabetta, we really see the human day-to-day problems being amplified or still being persistent and sometimes more difficult to overcome in these alternate realities than in our own, which again, like you just said, Elisabetta, gives us insight to who we are as individuals as well as who we are as a collective. And I appreciate that. And this movie definitely took twists and turns I did not see and was a fresh take on the dystopic narrative, which is one of my favorites, but it can get a little played out when you see a lot of the tropes over and over again. And this one was not that. So I appreciate your creativity and the freshness that you brought to this, Kelsey.
Thank you.
You know, I'm just going to quickly follow up on what you just said, Kelsey. Excuse me, what you said, Kelly, about freshness, because after our conversation yesterday, I was on a streaming service I won't mention, or I was on YouTube looking at the top 10 movies coming out in the streaming service, and they were all the same story. Some guy saving the world from the apocalypse, right? This movie is not that. It's not that in incredibly important ways. So before we jump into our conversation, I do want to just give a little background information on Kelsey Egan. She's an American South African filmmaker, writer, actress, and stunt performer. She founded the Cape Town-based production company Crave Pictures. Her short film Gargoyle in 2009 and science fiction film Glasshouse 2021 were nominated for South African Film and Television Awards. Glasshouse received 6 SAFTA nominations, including Best Feature Film, winning 5 of them. Glasshouse also received the Best Picture Award at the 2022 Electric Dreams International Film Festival. And at this year's Electric Dreams Festival, Egan's most recent project, The Fix, received the award for Best Visual Effects. Again, Kelsey, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. And it was honestly, I just have to say quickly, just listening to you guys talk about also your backgrounds and your response to this type of material, I just feel like I'm home. Yeah, it's very,
so do we. And what I mean by that is Dark Loops Productions was created to sustain a world of long-winded, nuanced, after-dinner, 2 glass of wine conversations, which is being deselected culturally. And so I don't know how many people actually watch, but nonetheless, some of them are home at this table. So we have to make sure we set it. So thank you for being here. And what we'll do now is begin with Kelly telling us something about the movie that really stood out to her.
So many things. This is a movie that had a lot of lines that resonated with me, which I appreciate because sometimes dialogue is written very poorly. So well done. And like right out the gate, we don't know who the characters are. We don't know what's happening, but we see Saul sitting there working on his drugs. And he's speaking with, and I forget that character's name now. And I feel Spider, thank you. I was like, I know it's not not a typical human name. And he says, they're talking about the death toll and how everything is catastrophic, setting the scene, right? And he says something to the effect of there's going to be a lot of loss, so it might as well be for science. And that just really hit me. And that's when I was like, oh, this is not what I thought it was. Because, you know, in human history, a lot of innovation and progress has come from tragedy. And there have been specific people who have taken advantage of those situations. And that was not something that I really expected to see play out in this film and the various ways that it did. So I really appreciate that, like I said, right out the gate. But that's not what I want to talk about. What I do want to talk about is the element of change and how you visualize that in this movie. And in our pre-podcast, we had talked about how while humans as a species are so capable of adapting and so resilient in a lot of these situations, we are so adamant that we're not going to do it. And in your film, we see the physical pain that Ella goes through when she's embarking in this change, in this transformation. And a lot of times, you know, when we go through change in daily life, it is painful, but not in a way that other folks can see. It's an internalized pain, right? That we feel like we're experiencing on our own. And so to see this pain manifest in Ella physically, not only because of her transformation, but I do believe through the grief and the trauma that she's experienced and the world has experienced, is not a manifestation that we typically see in movies. And so I love how you brought both of those elements together and were able to demonstrate that this is a difficult process and it does cause pain. And at the end, again, same character, Saul, you know, she's finally confronting him because he created the drug that did this to her. And she's saying like, why would you do this? I forget exactly what she says to him. And she says like, look at me, like who would want this? And he says, oh, they're just side effects. And the way that he says that, it seems so callous in that moment. But then we realize, oh no, he took it too. He's speaking from experience, not from like this dismissive, which is kind of what Ella's been used to her whole life, right? And so their relationship, first of all, was just beautiful and kind of totally unexpected. But the way that you portrayed the element of change, which all of us undergo at some point, whether we want to or not, and the way that that theme played out, I thought was so standout and so exemplary for, again, this type of movie, but also the type of change that Ella was going through at that time, because it wasn't singular, right? It was multidimensional. So I would love to talk a little bit more about your inspirations for that, and sort of how you visualize that coming to be, because again, it was not a piece that and we can really see her pain, right? When the claws are coming out, when she's cutting them off, when I forget the name, but when the little sticky things show up on, right? Yeah, these aren't things. Yeah, it's not like, oh, you grew 6 inches and you're happy about it because you're a teenager and whatnot, even though that's painful too, right? Like this is a completely different type of change or transformation, but one that is absolutely necessary, which the grieving process is as well, right? That is a necessary thing we have to go through, but it hurts to do it.
At first, I'm again, I'm just so touched and so thrilled that you're seeing all of that, because it was all very much at the fore when I was in the writing stages, development stages for many, many years. But all of these things that you've seen are so there, and it's just it's almost emotional when like you share like your baby, we call it the monster baby, with the world. And people actually see what you were trying to do and get it and also take value from it. It's like means so much. But I think, the magic of film is that it's a visual medium, right? And the magic of sci-fi is that you can do the extraordinary, or you don't have to pay as close attention to the rules of the world as we know it. And I think that gave me a lot of license to visualize sort of the themes and ideas that are very internal, right? So letting Ella's like internal psychological transformation and emotional journey throughout the film be visualized with this very, very extreme transformation physically was actually quite a gift as a filmmaker. And we spoke, like we did so much in development for the payoff to work within the genre, but also for the character, in that at first it is terrifying. The stuff, like nothing about what you see happening to her is something anyone's gonna be like, yeah, I'd love that to happen to me. That'd be great. You know, it's all stuff that, like, yeah, sure, some of it you can be like, oh, it's cool that she's stronger now, but like that to me is the bare minimum. Like no one's gonna be comfortable with growths of things coming out of their skin, protrusions, et cetera, et cetera. But in that phase, we did a lot of, and this is a little bit graphic, guys, sorry. We did a lot of research and visual research and pulling imagery. Like my search history was not good about necrosis, because it was like how much of her had to die to be replaced by this sort of like new type of skin, new type of growth, as her DNA fuses with this foreign DNA and it's sort of spliced in. And that there is a death and rebirth process there, so that the first phases of her transformation, we broke it up into 4 different stages throughout the film, and that really informed our VFX workflow as well. That like, okay, you're doing this phase 1, you're doing phase 2, now we're on phase 3, now it's on stage 4, you know, was that it's like scary, horrifying, 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 and then you see the end product and it's like, holy shit. Because the end product is sort of defies expectations and being actually quite, I think personally, quite stunning, quite beautiful. You don't
if
get
I
that.
jump on the discussion, I loved the scene when she lose her ear and she and the scene was really body horror, but at the same time, what came after this fairy ear, I thought that it was like a magical process. You had this elegance also in creating the body horror, because we are watching a tremendous transformation, a painful one, but that point, all the spikes in her new ear, all the color, I don't know, I found it really, really beautiful, and it was traumatic, but it also showed the beauty of evolution, and it was not easy to do. I just focused on the necrotic ear on the floor, and this wonderful new ear appearing. I don't know. I really like that. Particular.
I'm so glad we like worked really hard as well on designing that ear and making sure that it delivered. And did sort of transcend and up level, because it's not just the visuals of like, oh, it looks cool. It's like all of the different sensory things that ear can do. We wanted it to visually, organically, in a realistic way convey that she was going to have extra perception now, that her senses were going to be dramatically improved in ways that we couldn't necessarily conceive of, in terms of like sensing vibrations, in terms of touch, in terms of sensitivity. And I mean, in some ways, I almost wonder if some of those tendrils were almost inspired by Octavia Butler's Imago, because I love that book. But I know, and to some degree,
very close to home.
Yeah. But
also the allegorical power that you use, because everything's mutation was magical. So you were showing the greatness, the beautiful of changing. Really great.
Sorry, no,
go ahead.
I just don't know if I've answered your question fully, but I could talk about it forever. But yeah, I think the one thing that I will say is that yes, of course it's pseudoscience, but it's all pseudoscience based on what the current like cutting edge technology of DNA splicing shows us what is possible. So it's like very important to me in the writing that there was never a jump so far removed that it wasn't within the realm of possibility. And everything that I show that happened to her, she's essentially becomes a chimera. And that's something that was important to me, that it was within the grasp of what we're capable of.
Yeah,
and that end scene where we see her Oh, sorry, that end scene where we
No.
see her in her full form, right? And she's standing over the city and she looks akin to a vigilante superhero or a gargoyle guardian, right? And the
Yeah, yeah.
juxtaposition from where she started, like, because we see her in the modeling. So from where she began to where she was, I honestly think that the end product is far more beautiful than the beginning. I agree with you. And like you said, Elisabetta, that the transformation and watching it while traumatic was also beautiful to see. We don't typically get to see that the evolution working like that because it happens much faster than in a period
Mm.
of, like,
Yeah. Very, very
Heroine
accelerated.
journey.
What
Yeah,
I
that's
really,
the movie magic.
yeah.
what I enjoyed about the ear scene, one of the things I'm very much into working in my own head these days is the notion of cosmic bliss, because we've got enough cosmic horror to last us a lifetime. It's all based on fear. It's all based on fear of the unknown. And by having that ear be, I'm going to say, ambiguously beautiful, right? I think it's kind of a Rorschach. The viewer has their own take on it, and it reveals their fear versus, avoid, approach, a response, a difference. But in that moment, she's terrified of this thing going on with her, yet at the same time, it's beautiful. And it's almost as if what's common between cosmic bliss and cosmic terror, cosmic horror, is a state of awe. And she's kind of in a state
Mm.
of awe. And at that moment, she's not in for it. She's not into it, right? Interestingly enough, we are. And there have been some movies that have tried to deal with the issue of cosmic bliss. I think Annihilation took a stab at it. Those people made of trees were beautiful, but there was nothing there that anyone celebrated. There was nothing. So, doing cosmic bliss is difficult because it's not just I'm happy, it's damn, I'm terrified and this is glorious. So I really appreciated, yeah, just how that felt to watch that scene.
No, thank you. And it is also like that's the question that Solomon poses in the film, right? And he's the only one championing this thing. It's like, yes, there's side effects, but you're not going to be relying on a drug to survive. I think it's worth it.
Yes, no,
And yes, maybe that's just my opinion, but everyone should have that choice.
What will
go
you
ahead.
choose? Red pill, blue pill, evolution, or drugs? From here. Okay, Kelsey already an answer. Kelly
I know what
and
I
Scott.
choose.
Yeah. I think that line, it's only side effects, or it's just side effects, actually is a second viewing line. Because in the first viewing, you're like, dude, she's in, what are you saying? Right? She's going
Exactly.
through mess and you're calling it a side effect. But then
Mhm.
when you watch it again, you know he knows
Where it's
where
coming
she's
from.
going. And now when he says it's a side effect in the second viewing, it's like you're moving into a state of cosmic bliss. You will be Gaia. You will save this planet. And he knows that, and you can see the awe in his face unfold over the whole thing. So there's a lot of what I'll call second viewing lines in this movie that about second viewing is like, damn, that was written well. That's cool. They knew that I would want to come back and see that line. Absolutely, or hear that line.
Thank you.
Well, now that we're talking about, I'm going to call him Soul. And the reason I'm going to call him Soul is because I don't know that it's my emotionally favorite scene, but my intellectually most favorite scene is between Eric and Soul. And what's going on is Eric's trying to get him to give him the formula. Soul's telling him no. They go back and forth as to why, but they never have an argument that stays at the same point. Basically, what you see is Eric doing what most people of privilege do, and that is turning their cognitive dissonance into a virtue,
Yeah.
right? He knows, unconsciously, he knows that he's a greedy son of a bitch. Unconsciously, he knows that all of this is about his identity and not about saving the world. But he's so thoroughly gaslighted himself or gaslit himself, just like a lot of people do. I'm doing this for my kids. I'm doing this for everybody. I'm doing this for the world. And what that does, it's she doth protest too much, right? It makes it clear what you're hiding. And what you're hiding is the fact that you don't feel good about this at some level, but you have to convince yourself on a daily basis that you do. Now, I actually wrote that entire scene out
Wow.
because there's lines here, so I'm calling him Soul. And the reason I'm calling him Soul is SOL is Latin for son. energy.
Yep.
You guys know who I think about energy,
Yep,
right?
yep, yep.
And when you look at Soul as the sun, then you're looking at her as Gaia. And then you're getting a completely different, you're getting a very indigenous ethos, a very indigenous worldview where
Mm.
people experience themselves as of, from, and about the reality they're nested in, as opposed to the job being to get above it, to dominate it. And so Saul says you want to harvest her. And Eric says you created a priceless research. You created a priceless resource. I'll do whatever it takes to get Areve to more people. All of that is she doth protest too much. All of that is him persuading himself, not Soul, right? And Soul says, people you choose. And he says, don't be so holy. Again, all of this writing is to deflect, to make it look like Soul's the one on a mission. Soul's mission is a little bit different. It's not so much about his identity. I'd say it still is, but it's about a larger scale identity. Eric's isn't. Anyway, I could read the whole scene, but it's just this refusal to engage Soul at the level that he's talking, and to make sure that the world knows that Eric is a good person. And I have, as an administrator for years, I have been in so many conversations with people where you just learn to listen and figure out what they want, right? And that's not a bad thing. I think if we gave each other a little more grace and just listen to each other in terms of what we want, instead of trying to make everybody be right and demand that they be right, it's a little more honest. Anyway, Soul talking to Gaia, by the way, also talking to Spider. So the world's taking itself back, right? I mean, it's all kind of there. I very much appreciate, and I appreciated the writing that scene. How long did it take to write that scene, and how many times did you have to redo it?
Well done. Well spotted. That was definitely a pivotal scene in the film. I probably rewrote it over 20 times because I had to get so much exposition, explanation in there in a way that didn't feel that way.
Yeah.
But also because I really, because that's the scene that fundamentally you understand the worldview and position that both those characters are coming from and what their core conflict is. And I think, I mean, your observations are fantastic about how O'Connor's is convincing himself as much as anyone else. But I think he has successfully convinced himself. And I don't view Eric as a villain or a conventional villain, because he truly believes and has convinced himself that he's doing the best thing for the world, because he's not willing to think outside of the box in the way that Solomon is, right? Like, he's like, there isn't going to be anyone who is on board with this idea of taking this competitive drug. But obviously it serves him to believe that, right?
Yeah.
It's all of his wants and needs. He needs to believe that. But so he's convinced himself he truly does, that no one's ready for it. But the thing is, in the worst permutation of humanity, he might be right. In the best permutation of humanity, when people do see that change is necessary to avoid calamity, to avoid the loss of autonomy, to avoid complete destruction of the human race, like those are things that Solomon's like, no, I believe we're ready. Like like some people are gonna see the importance of what I've done, and O'Connor's like, nah, they're not ready. And so then it becomes this like philosophical debate, is like, can mankind act in its own best interests? And Eric's argument, like so many rulers and kingdoms of the past, were like, no, the serfs cannot. I'm the one with the education. I'm the one who's like literally been put through the system to know what is best. I've gone to the most prestigious schools. I've been sort of brought up in a way my entire life to be a decision maker and to read the room and see what is going to do the best for the most number of people. And this is what it is. And from Solomon's perspective, having not had that privilege, still being a genius, but not having access to that privilege, is being like, it doesn't matter. Maybe you are that thing, but it still doesn't give you the right. It doesn't give any one individual the right to decide who lives or dies. And that is at the core central of the conflict. And I think in writing that scene, it's actually one of my favorite scenes from a literary point of view, and putting that forward, because it becomes bigger of like, maybe you do have all of the knowledge and the education to make a decision, but how does any one person ever take on that right. And that goes back to, ironically enough, a book I read when I was very young, Daniel Quinn's Ishmael, of posing those questions of humankind, like taking the apple from the tree, like eating the fruit of knowledge, and all of a sudden thinking that we knew what was best for the world, and we can make that call. Where Solomon's like, no, any one person cannot. We need to give people choice. And I think that was like the core heart of that scene for me.
Yeah. Well, I loved it, and it was a very graceful scene. Very cognitive scene, but still very graceful and very important.
Can I comment on that?
Of course.
Because it also, to me, showed the importance of perspective and authenticity, because both of those men believed they were living a life of service and that they were doing what they were doing for the betterment of humanity. But like you just said, Kelsey, one man's perspective came from the power and privilege that he was afforded, and the other man's perspective came from the lived experience among real people who don't have that power and privilege. And the privileged person, you know, was clouded and more disillusioned by what I would think are, you know, sort of the trinkets and trophies of life, whereas the non-powerful person saw reality for what it was. And again, understood that no one individual can play God and have the authority to make these choices, regardless of how much privilege they've been afforded. And I also loved that you never directly say in the movie where Aram comes from, but there is enough clues, like that little kid in the hospital asking if Ella's there to take her upstairs. Like, it's obvious where this is happening. And so that's something that we don't really talk about, but to me was a really powerful point of the movie, because that's also part of Solomon's goal, is to stop people from dying to let other people live, right? Because it's not like these people are just dying because of the pollution and the toxins. They are dying to create the antidote or the solution for more privileged people. And that's something that we never hear out loud, but is at the core of Solomon's mission, is that everyone has suffered enough. And the fact that we are now taking people's suffering and capitalizing on it so that those deemed worthy can live another day or however long, you know, Aram lasts or affords you. That is not like, there's no level of cognitive dissonance or hoops that he could jump through would make that okay for Saul. But Eric, you know, and we see through the eyes of his child who Eric really is, which I also really appreciated that inclusion as well. But yeah, that scene was really just, it really showed the stark difference. Does the ends justify the means, right? Because these two men were trying to get the same thing, but in very different ways. And I think all of us on this call can see, like, one man had virtue, the other man had greed, wrapped in virtue.
So I'm gonna keep this conversation going. Y'all interrupt me when you want to. I really did sense it as two different worldviews, and 80% of the world's population lives in indigenous holist worldviews, where they experience themselves as part of the context they're in. They don't experience their mission to achieve entrance into some space that's non-contingent on reality. It's a thing called heaven. They see this as beautifully ugly heaven. This is our realm. And I sensed their moral agendas. They look opposed, and I agree. And at the same time, I think Soul is just a little more open to the idea of letting the world express itself. He doesn't know if this is going to work. You know, he says to her, yeah, a lot of people won't choose it. He doesn't know. Whereas Eric's one of these people, he's a Faustian, just, I got to know. And the point is to get my education, as you said, and then I know, as if somehow the human that emerged from Gaia can know Gaia better than Gaia, right? And that central, I mean, it's in Goethe's Faust. It's been a critique of the Enlightenment for centuries, and we're still not getting it. Right. So this movie brings it home. I love the fact that it's an individual female protagonist who makes this Gaia choice at the end. She doesn't know. It's not about control. It's about going into the world as it is. And so I said enough already.
But I think you've touched on something really interesting there that that I think it's worth diving into, because it wasn't something that I thought about when I wrote the first draft of the script at all. But now, retroactively, having gone through this completely life-changing, world-changing event that was the pandemic, and having film come out after that, even though it was written before, is something I think about a lot, is that there's this like this increasing backlash against science because of this fear or hesitation around accepting the fact that, like anything, it's an imperfect art. You try, you learn, it's trial and error, it's testing. You have to go through methodology. You have to go through the scientific method. You have to, like, and that actually, people are always learning and you're always building on that. You're not going to get a black and white answer, and you can't provide one. It's not possible. Organisms are too variable. How one body reacts to one thing isn't going to be exactly identical to how another body reacts to something. However, if over 90% of people react to something in the same way, probably a good idea.
Yeah.
Right. But you're always
Well,
going to have that 10% that doesn't come out ahead. Right. And I think that,
exactly.
or more realistically, 0.001%. But you guys know what I'm talking about. But
Somebody
like,
took psychology. Someone was a psychology.
yeah. but it's that like I think what is maturity, what is understanding how difficult and how challenging the world really is knowing that we cannot control everything, and that we can only do our best, and that there's a lot of really, really, really well-educated, intelligent people doing their damn best to the best of their ability, but there is always an element of the unknown. And that has to be okay. And I think in showing Solomon as a scientist, it was really important to me that he was honest about that every step of the way and was willing to self-test on himself. He was making the own personal sacrifice. He never expected this drug to walk away out of his lab and end up in someone else's hand. That was the massive mistake, right? Right?
Yeah.
It was like, oh my God. But like every scientist worth nightmare. But he was willing to make that personal sacrifice. Whereas O'Connor is when the chairman, his father, sort of scolds him or smacks him down. It's like, why were you trying all of these permutations of this other option if it wasn't going to work? And he's like, well, we had to try. But that's the chairman coming at it with this like very obtuse view of like that, like, well, why try if it's not going to work? It was like, because no one will know. How are you supposed to know? And at least, I mean, to O'Connor's credit, he is enough of a scientist that he understood that and was really, really working hard to come up with a synthetic alternative to the active ingredient of air remedy, which Athera was responsible for essentially almost driving to extinction. You're running out of this priceless drug that's going to, enable everyone to survive, and you don't have the ingredient that you need to keep making it. He's trying to do synthetic alternatives. It's not working, but Solomon was the one who thought outside of the box and was like, well, this isn't sharp left. We're going to go in a different direction. Yeah, it's going to shake shit up a lot more, but we got to try. And I think is at the root of something I find really beautiful about science and need to embrace, but that you can't berate or cast people as villains just because they're working in a field there's no way to know for sure about anything without trial and error.
Yeah, and we as a species expect there to be answers. We ask a question, there's an answer. Like, we just have to find it, right? That's not always true, as proved shown by Eric's 600 plus attempts at a synthetic version that never came to fruition. So that's, part of the human hubris is that we expect answers. We're entitled to them, and our journeys are going to come to fruition in some way or not. But where is that written? That is not a law of the universe or physics. There are questions that have been plaguing us for centuries that we still don't have the answers to. And so back to the question of control, when we give up control and accept, like Ella did eventually, accept what happens to you, that's when life really can find a way, and what is meant to be can be in its most beautiful and pure form.
Yeah, well
I
said.
think we could do a whole podcast on the current religiosity of contemporary science. I mean, it's not the science itself, it's the cultural misunderstanding that science is a practice. Just like writing music is a practice.
Yeah.
And for me, the Enlightenment made us feel like we were moving away from Christianity's binaries, but in fact, we've just embraced them with rationalism, and we've replaced the soul with the mind. They're still separate, right? And it's a non-holistic way of looking at reality that still has people going after strong AI to become immortal. Right. It's immortal in information versus a soul. And we don't do a good job as scientists teaching people about the practice nature.
Yeah.
We buy into the religiosity because it makes us priests and bishops, right? And so, yeah, there's that.
Well said.
Elizabeth, go ahead.
There is also,
Elizabeth, did
there
you
is
want to go
also
ahead?
another line that we can
Please.
extrapolate from the speech between Eric and Saul, and is the line between utopia and dystopia. The line between the good place and the good and the bad place is really fragile, and basically it depends on the perspective, and the perspectives are shaped by political ideology, social class, gender, skin color, species. A fact that we haven't still analyzed is that, quoting Bookchin in The Ecology of Freedom, if I recall it right, the exploitation of nature by man is like a reflex of the exploitation of man by man. So
Wow.
there is a double level. At the same time, research, Eric, were destroying all the oh God, what's the name of the insect? There are
Dragonfly?
dragonfly.
There was a type of
Yeah.
dragonfly, yeah.
Yeah, they were destroying a part of the environment, and they were doing it without remorse, also because they are doing the same against humanity. Is humanity against humanity, humanity against environment, and everything is like controlled by they are eager for privilege, for control, for profit, and they are losing all the other side because they are not. Yeah, it's like hegemonic humanity doesn't understand the evil that is imposing on other groups or other parts of society that are not included into their holy vision of the world. There is I appointed somewhere. Okay, it's here. Milan Kundera said the dreams of a paradise, as soon as it's set out, its realization begins to stumble upon people who get in its way. And so the rulers of paradise have no choice but to build a small gulag on one side of Eden.
Wow.
And it's gulag and Eden. It's exactly what the movie shows. Red zone and people with a lot of drugs and privilege and possibility to not only to protect themselves, but to protect the daughter and son, granddaughter and it's crazy. They were
But it
not
goes back to othering.
about human development, human safety. They were simply doing something for egoism, to protect themselves, and that's it. So I see Eric a little bit more villain than maybe you do.
Yeah, I think it was important for me as a writer to not see him as that. I really love him as a character, and I think Daniel Sharman was just exquisite.
Oh, the actor was great. The actor
No.
throughout the movie was
I
great.
love the character. I love him, but really,
Yeah. I mean,
more evil than it.
He got the nuance. He got the nuance. But I want to go back to, because in the pre-show you were speaking about othering, which I thought was like really perceptive and really on point because it's threaded throughout the film. But now you guys have all observed that part of the othering was even Chloroscypha consueta, the dragonfly, and like humankind's tendency to focus on the short term and the need and use this overpowering need to justify sort of absolute destruction of an other, right? But not necessarily having the foresight to realize that in this panic response of prioritizing the overpowering need in the short term, that you're actually jeopardizing everyone as a whole in the long term.
Yep.
And I think that was an analogy that I took pleasure in writing, because I think we do it all the time.
Can I also say that maybe the biggest villain is Eric's father? Because there is also a lot of daddy issues in all his way to conduct research. Is living like behind the shadow of this gigantic, powerful man, and he really begged for his approval. And the result is for the approval of one person, he is destroying the life of other million.
And that was also in like my sort of love for O'Connor's. It was like being like, every villain comes from somewhere. Every villain has an origin story of why they are the way they are. And I loved being able to do this father-son, grandson dynamic in the film. And we had lots of conversations at different stages of development. I'm like, do we need Max? I was like, yes, we need Max, right? You know,
Max was a great add to the, and I love the part when he asked Ella if she's a fairy.
Yeah.
But that's the moment, right, where she gets to choose, because no adult would have posed it in that way. And it was only having a child's innocence or wisdom, really, in seeing it and framing it in that way did her reframe occur.
Good fairy.
And I thought that was like, I think that's my favorite moment in the film.
Yeah.
When he asked her that, and he asked it, and then she you see her decide and realize who she is. For the first
time.
At
what point in the writing process was that scene? In other words, I'm sure the thing wasn't written linearly. For example, the last line. All right, the whole. Usually, most movies have a money line that shows up, and okay, this is the line that inspired writing the project. You know, either we change or we die. That seems pretty straightforward, right? But that scene where he calls her a fairy, was that one of the first things you had in mind as you wrote it?
No, I mean, that was in the iteration of that. And gosh, like, please forgive me. I really hope I'm remembering this right, because it was over 10 years. But from the moment Max existed, that line existed. Let's put it that way. Max didn't exist at first, but by the time he did exist, when I wrote that scene, I don't remember any version of the script. That was the first line. There were subsequent conversations of like, is that the right line? Should we change it? But I think everyone was always pretty sold that was the right line.
That's a bold writing move.
Resistance to it. Is it bold?
Well, it is, because it could be seen as sappy.
Right.
Because it's the very discreet introduction of a complete reframe of her condition coming from a kid's. Oh, come on, kids.
No, you're right.
But it didn't work that way.
But it's not sappy because of her physical transformation, because she doesn't look like a human anymore. And so for this child, she looks like what a fairy might really look like.
Yeah.
But
I actually.
He also.
No, go ahead.
Sorry. No. Go. I can go.
No. You go.
I just wanted to say that he gives a hope to humanity, because he can see the beauty of the transformation. He sees a fairy, not a monster. So maybe people will embrace otherness instead of fighting.
Exactly. And I love the juxtaposition of O'Connor's constantly calling her a monster, and then his like extreme frustration when his son is like, you tried to shoot the fairy, and he's like, she's not a fucking fairy. And it's like, but no, she is now. She is now. Sorry, it's too late.
She can be a fairy, she can be a monster, she can be every creature she decides to be, and at the same time, people can choose how to see her.
And that goes back to the perception.
And they can also see a monster and still decide that there is enough space in the world to share part of our earth with monsters.
But that's the thing. I mean, I love monsters.
And
what does monster mean?
Yeah.
Was it Frankenstein, or was it what he created?
Well,
100%, exactly that. And I think embracing monsters. One of my favorite books is a sort of a retelling of the Beowulf story from the point of view of Grendel. It's just like an absolute phenomenal book, and I think it like reframing what is a monster is a really important question, which definitely came up in the writing of this. But yeah, I think Max that the child sees the heart is something that
I think we create monsters, and as we create beauty. Everything is a social construct. We decide what we want to imagine or perceive as beautiful.
Well, it's like that brilliant Twilight Zone episode when that I don't remember the name of the episode in Twilight, but when they're unwrapping the bandages of the woman's face, and everyone's terrified, and you get the end reveal, and she's gorgeous, and then you get the camera turns around, and that gave me nightmares as
Did
a
you
kid.
watch that with your
But
dad growing up?
I did,
You did,
100%. Of course I did.
Good
And
dad.
it's thanks to my dad that I
Yeah,
read all the
exactly.
science
Yeah.
fiction that I read as a child. He exposed it to me. Everything is thanks to my dad.
And I
So
mean,
there's a
speaking
go
of dad
ahead.
and Max, I think from Max's perspective, his dad is the monster, right? Because of what, and we can
Yeah.
see Eric trying really hard not to be his dad. We see his trauma, right? And we see Eric
Yeah.
trying really hard to shield Max
Yeah.
from this part of his life and not see who he really is and to keep this facade, even though it's clear that he kind of is shown who he really is. But when Max shows up and we see them interacting, all Max sees is the vitriol and sort of the
Right.
I don't want to say evil, but the badness of his dad. He doesn't actually get to see him as anything but a monster, but that's because of the choices that Eric makes. And so he's presented with this thing that doesn't look like a human, but he doesn't see that as the monster because that thing is helping him. That thing is good. But what his dad is doing, those are things monsters do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Eric's challenge is the same as Faust's in that he believes that knowledge is a scientific knowledge, rationalism is truth, and he buys into his daddy's N of one as the frame of reference for how to be. We never even see Soul's family. Why? Because Soul's the world, man. Soul's, Soul's there. Everybody's his family.
Yeah.
And I thought those brains. So here's what I want to do. We don't have a whole lot of time left. I want to say a couple of things about how the concept of death was treated in the show, and then open that up to a conversation. Because when you wrote the line very early on where she's getting her makeup done, and the makeup artist says, then she says to the makeup artist, then we'll both have mothers who chose to die. On the one hand, did you equate that use of the concept death there with Elle's choice at the end of the movie? In other words, there is an Ella that's dying. And you even talked about the deteriorating body over the course. There is a being that no longer exists at the end of the movie. And I just wondered that idea of death and what it means just seemed to play out over the course of the flick. I'll throw that out there and see what everyone thinks.
Interesting. I want to hear what everyone else thinks first, and then I'll say what I was thinking when I was writing it.
Death is another thing in our society that has this negative stigma to it and this fear surrounded by it. And I personally view death as a beautiful process, and I find beauty in death. And I on the one hand, I feel like that's part of what you were conveying with the death of Ella becoming something else and becoming something more beautiful in that. And I don't know this, like, because yes, it was a transformation, but part of her did die. We saw her body parts literally die and fall
Our
off.
ear fell off, man.
So I feel comfortable saying that. But when you grieve a loss of someone, that their death is also the death of what you thought you knew or the life you thought. Like you have to grieve the loss of that person, and so that narrative you have also dies. But death doesn't have to. It's not inherently negative. There are so many times that death is a blessing or is beautiful or is the best possible outcome. And so I don't know that this film portrayed death in a negative way or in an ugly way so much as what we've done to the world. And we're almost prolonging the world's life through this and making it suffer when death might be a more elegant or beautiful solution in this situation. But I thought this was a very realistic portrayal of the grieving process. Which is a death in its own right, and the difficulties and the trauma therein, but how at the end of it, if you persevere, if you push through the pain, if you allow yourself to feel and be in those moments, you could become something more beautiful and transcendent that you had no idea you were capable of becoming, or what's on the other side may in fact not be better than, but the difference that it is may be welcome, right? It may not be what you're afraid of. It, in fact, may be a new chapter and a new start that is beautiful and has opportunity for you as well.
Unlock a few new chakras as you
go through. So I didn't see it in the same way that you referenced it there, Scott, but I did see it as being present in a different way.
I have a bad relation with death and with acceptance of grieving. But I like the use of death as a metaphorical death, so like transformation. It's nice to see the first lines are about real death and real people who are dying, and in the last scenes, we are watching an allegorical death, a death that can be also the opening for a new life. And actually, that also in our world is like this. You are dying simply to create something else. Simply, you are abandoning your human, animal, or plant form to reconnect with the unknown and to be part of a new regeneration. And in the closure of the movie, we are seeing a new element, a new figure, and I don't know which part of Ella is dead, which part is still alive. I have no idea. Maybe it's simply in the process. So
yeah, when the phoenix arises from the ashes, how much of the old is merged with the new? I think that's and that's up to interpretation. I would say a fair bit. I think what comes before always informs what you become as well, because what couldn't exist if what came before hadn't happened to you. I also really struggle with death and grieving. I'm not. I don't do it gracefully. So that really resonated what you said there. But I think in the initial line, which to be honest was written very late, that line setting up Ella, we were trying to find, and we went through a lot of different conversations about that, of trying to find a very sharp line that really encapsulated her trauma, but showed how she was trying to be brash and outspoken about what happened to her mother in a way that showed a tough shell, but also showed how much pain there was behind it.
Mission accomplished. Yep.
Yeah. And also that she would,
perfect.
yeah, thank you. And that she would say something so sharp to, you know, the makeup artist who she clearly has a good relationship with, but as well, it's arguably hugely offensive, but can you even be mad at her? Because she's just saying it the way it is. If you have a parent, I think we've all been in situations where you have someone you love very much aging who isn't making a decision for themselves that's going to help them extend their life or heal or take care of themselves, and like the anger and frustration of that. And Ella just says it how it is. It's like, well, that could lead to her dying, and my mom chose to die too, and then we'll have something in common. Great. Yeah. You know, it's like like that dark humor and trauma is something that I don't know. I think everyone, many people drawn. But I think what really resonated with me, and what's for me the heart of the film, is the argument between Gina and Ella, where finally lets loose and saying, no one actually likes me for me. The only thing they ever liked me for was this external appearance based on my resemblance to my mother that has nothing to do with that I am. And one specific line in particular, which to me is the most moving personally, is when she's like, you don't know what it's like to lose the one person who like truly knew you and have them decide that you weren't worth sticking around for. Because it's like, it doesn't matter who you are and what I am to you, you'd still rather go. And I think from Ella's perspective, her mother was the only person who saw her besides just this external appearance of her looks, who really saw her from watching her grow up as a girl, and every permutation of her childhood, that her mother saw her and yet chose to leave. So she was a bit like the one person who really knew who she was, decided that she wasn't worth sticking around for. And Gina was the closest thing she had in her life that she thought was someone who really knew her. And then Gina's like, yeah, but you're not great. And that was so painful to hear. That and I think that was the heart of Ella's wound. And then her realizing and through her transformation that who she is will always be influenced by who she's perceived, but she can change the narrative if she chooses to be a certain thing. And then when Max gives her that choice, all the adults put a narrative on her, but Max takes the moment to ask her, are you the good material?
He asked exactly.
Yeah.
How are you today?
And it is up to her to decide. For me, that was like the most brilliant counterpoint to that anguish Ella was feeling of not being seen and losing the one person who saw you, and what that does to us. When people misunderstand or accuse you of horrible things, like I've been in those situations. I've had people accuse me of horrible things that I've never done, That was never my intention. That was never my motivation. When other people are seeing you in such a way that's so in your mind horrific and unthinkable, and yet other people really see, like, there's very few things more painful than that, to be so misunderstood.
The most heartbreaking scene, I think, for me in the movie is when Ella's being arrested and Gina's there, and she's Ella's yelling, I didn't do this. You know, I'm not that person. And Gina says, I don't know that. I don't know anymore. And I was like, oh man, the one person that you thought.
Wow.
Like, yeah, that just broke my heart for all the reasons you just said, Kelsey.
Yeah.
Well,
no, 100% was that.
On that note, that none of us win the knowing the writer's favorite line contest, we're going to go ahead and bring this wonderful conversation to a close. Elisabetta, Kelly, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day.
Always a pleasure.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to watch the film and for the conversation and for seeing. I write, I want to make movies to provoke thought. And that's why I'm here. And to, I mean, I know how much literature and films that I've seen growing up and even to this day influence me and affect me and impact me. And I think like that's such a great gift to the world. Art is such a great gift to the world. And you want to keep the conversation going and keep making art that can keep the conversation going or dialogue. So to have such a beautiful dialogue with all of you means a lot. And very quickly, I do just have to say, yes, it was not an accident that I shortened Solomon to Soul. Yes, it was mispronounced. Yes, it was my fault. But yes, it was because
No, I thought it was a writing choice. I actually thought it
was odd.
Okay, I thought it was a writing choice to deflect the audience from Saul.
Yeah, so, I just felt if I pronounced it Soul, it would be too on the nose, and because it's Solomon, but it was that nod of, and I think your interpretation or your understanding of that using the metaphor of the sun and Gaia is just absolutely beautiful. Thank you.
I want to know what else was in the drug. Because Ella says, there's more than just dragonfly.
Oh, but that's the sequel.
That's the
sequel, right?
To the sequel and the prequel. I won't
because
so keep writing.
The third film in the trilogy is already written. The middle film is not.
All right. But what I love about there's some other DNA in here is that we've been thinking, okay, Soul's this magnanimous guy. No, he knows these systems are going to have to fight to survive. He knows that they're coming at him like the X-Men. So he's got to arm them. So she's practically a version of Logan, right? I mean, they're got to be ready to fight. And I love the fact that someone who's an assistant to Gaia gets it, because Gaia is both the giver and the taker of life, and there's going to be fights. And yeah.
All of those things. I hope I get to make it. We'll see.
We hope so too.
Well, we'll do our best to help you, Kelsey. Again, thank you so much for being here. We hope the movie.
On that note, watch the
movie. All right. Excellent.
Awesome.
Okay, thanks everyone. Take care.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.
Everyone.